Sign 1. You call your solitude loneliness. Because you're afraid to admit you chose it. Everyone thinks your solitude is a wound. They see you alone and assume you're isolated, abandoned, broken. And maybe you've been telling yourself the same story, that you're alone because nobody wants you. But here's what you're really running from: the truth that you chose this, that you prefer being alone, that solitude isn't your punishment, it's your preference, and that terrifies you. Jung discovered that true individuation requires the capacity to be completely alone without needing external validation. Most people never develop this, but you were forced to build this capacity early, and now you have something most people will never possess: complete psychological autonomy. When you're alone, you're not desperately waiting for someone to save you. You're not scrolling seeking connection. You're not feeling that gnawing emptiness that drives most people into toxic relationships. You're actually at peace. But here's what you're running from. If you admit you chose this solitude, you have to face something terrifying. You're not the victim of abandonment. You're someone who consciously chose power over connection, and that makes you dangerous. Because everyone else needs people to function. They need validation, approval, companionship. They're dependent, but you're self-sufficient. And self-sufficient people can't be controlled, can't be manipulated, can't be broken. They're bulletproof. You keep calling it loneliness because loneliness is a wound. Wounds are safe, but the moment you stop calling it loneliness and start calling it sovereignty, that's when you become bulletproof. And that's what terrifies you. Sign 2. You call your awareness anxiety because you're afraid of how much you actually see. Everyone tells you that you're anxious, hypervigilant, that your sensitivity is a disorder that needs medication. And maybe you've believed them, but here's what you're really running from. You're not anxious at all. You're awake. And being awake in a world full of sleeping people is terrifying. Jung realized that most people go through life in psychological sleep. They don't see the manipulation happening around them. They don't detect the lies, the performances, the shadow motivations. They're functionally blind, but you see everything. You detect micro-expressions. You sense incongruence between words and energy. You know when someone's lying before they've finished their sentence. You're not anxious. You're a walking lie detector. Here's what you're running from. If you stop pathologizing your perception, you have to face that you see through everyone. You see through the social games, the performances, the masks. And once you admit you can see all of that, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to sleep. And being awake is lonely. You can't connect with sleeping people. You can't trust people who don't even know themselves. Your awareness makes you bulletproof to manipulation, but it also makes you incompatible with most of humanity. So you keep calling it anxiety, because anxiety is a problem that needs solving. But the moment you stop calling it anxiety and start calling it awareness, that's when you accept you're operating at a frequency most people will never access. That's when you become bulletproof. Sign 3. You call your independence trauma, because you're afraid to admit you don't need anyone. Everyone sees your self-reliance and calls it an attachment wound. They say you have trust issues, that you need therapy to learn how to depend on others, and maybe you've internalized that narrative. But here's what you're really running from. You don't actually need anyone, not in the way other people do, and admitting that feels dangerous. Jung understood that most people never fully individuate. They go from depending on their parents, to depending on their partners, to depending on their children. They never develop complete psychological self-sufficiency, but you were forced to become your own parent, your own therapist, your own protector, before you were old enough to understand what was happening. And now you have something most people never develop: complete self-sufficiency. You can comfort yourself. You can validate yourself. You can survive completely alone. You're not dependent on anyone for your emotional stability. You're bulletproof. But here's what you're running from. If your independence isn't trauma, then what are you? You're someone who doesn't need the fundamental thing that keeps most people connected: mutual dependency. And that makes you fundamentally alone in a way that can't be fixed. So you keep calling it trauma, because trauma can be healed. But the moment you stop calling it trauma and start calling it independence, that's when you face that you're built different, that you're bulletproof, and that being bulletproof means being fundamentally alone. Sign 4. You minimize your pain tolerance, because you're afraid of what it means about what you've survived. Everyone else falls apart over things that barely register for you. A breakup that would devastate someone for months, you process in days. A betrayal that would shatter someone's worldview, you absorb and move forward from. And when people notice this, you downplay it. You say you're fine, it wasn't that bad, you minimize what you've survived. But here's what you're really running from. If you admit how much pain you can tolerate, you have to face how much pain you've already endured. Jung realized that the psyche, like muscle tissue, grows stronger under resistance. When you're exposed to consistent emotional intensity as a child, your psychological structure doesn't break, it expands. You become a container for pain that would destroy other people. And now you can sit in fires that consume others. You can metabolize suffering that would hospitalize most people. You're not numb. You're operating with a pain tolerance that's been trained since childhood. You're bulletproof to emotional devastation. But here's what you're running from. If you acknowledge how high your pain tolerance actually is, you have to face what that means about your past. It means the pain you endured was catastrophic. It means your childhood was so brutal that it forced your psyche to develop superhuman capacity just to survive. Because if you admit how bad it really was, you can't keep pretending it was normal. You can't keep minimizing. You have to face the full weight of what happened to you. And that's terrifying. So you keep minimizing. But the moment you stop minimizing and start acknowledging your actual pain tolerance, that's when you realize you survived something unsurvivable. That's when you realize you're bulletproof. Wait. If you recognize yourself in these first 4 signs, what's coming next will completely destroy your understanding of being broken. Signs 6 and 7 reveal the real reason you're terrified of your own power. Don't leave now. This is where you discover what you're really running from. Sign 5. You call it trust issues, when really you just see through everyone's performance. Everyone says you have trust issues, that you're guarded, closed off, and maybe you've accepted that diagnosis. But here's what you're really running from. You don't have trust issues at all. You have truth perception, and you can't trust people because you can see through their performance to the reality underneath. Jung realized that most people go through life performing. They wear masks, they play roles, they present curated versions of themselves, and most people accept these performances at face value. But you see the shadow behind the smile. You detect the incongruence between what people say and what they mean. You're not paranoid. You're perceptive. You've developed what Jung called shadow literacy. You can read the unconscious motivations people hide even from themselves. And once you see someone's shadow, you can't unsee it. Here's what you're running from. If you acknowledge that your perception is accurate, you have to face a devastating truth. Most people aren't trustworthy, not because they're evil, but because they're unconscious. They don't even know their own motivations. And you can't trust unconscious people, and that means you're fundamentally alone, because real connection requires being seen. But nobody can see you at the level you see them. You're operating at a level of consciousness that makes authentic connection nearly impossible. You're bulletproof to manipulation, but you're also isolated in your clarity. So you keep calling it trust issues. But the moment you stop calling it trust issues and start calling it truth perception, that's when you accept that you see things others don't, that you're bulletproof to deception. Sign 6. You call your boundaries selfishness, because you're afraid of your own power to say no. Everyone tells you that your boundaries are too rigid, that you're selfish, cold, and maybe you felt guilty every time you say no, every time you protect your energy. But here's what you're really running from. Your boundaries aren't selfish at all. They're self-preserving. And you're afraid of how powerful it makes you to be able to say no without guilt. Jung realized that most empaths never learn to protect their energy. They absorb everyone's pain. They sacrifice themselves to help others. They confuse compassion with caretaking. But you learned something most empaths never learn. You can feel everything and still protect yourself. Your empathy was forged in fire. You know suffering intimately. You can sit with someone's pain without drowning in it. You've developed fierce compassion, the kind that witnesses without rescuing, the kind that loves without losing itself. You're bulletproof to emotional manipulation. But here's what you're running from. If your boundaries aren't selfishness, then you have something dangerous. You have the power to say no. And people who can say no without guilt can't be controlled. They can't be manipulated through obligation. They're free, and freedom is terrifying. Because if you admit you have the power to say no to anything that doesn't serve you, you have to take responsibility for everything you're saying yes to. You can't be a victim anymore. So you keep calling it selfishness. But the moment you stop calling it selfishness and start calling it self-preservation, that's when you admit you have power, that you're bulletproof. Sign 7. You keep searching for healing, because you're terrified of admitting you're already whole. Final sign. You've been searching for healing for years. Therapy, books, meditation, courses, retreats. You're always working on yourself, always trying to fix what's broken. But here's what you're really running from. You're not broken at all. You're already whole. And admitting that means you'd have to stop hiding behind your healing journey and start living at your full power. Jung understood that many people use healing as a way to avoid power. As long as you're still healing, still working on yourself, still trying to fix your wounds, you have an excuse for not being fully powerful. You can say, I'm not ready yet. I need more healing. Your brokenness becomes your shield against having to be bulletproof. Here's the brutal truth. You're not still wounded. You've already metabolized your pain. You've already integrated your shadow. You've already done the work. But admitting that means you'd have to stop being the wounded healer and start being the healed master. And that's terrifying, because it means you have no more excuses. If you're already whole, then what are you waiting for? If you're already healed, then why aren't you using your gifts? If you're already bulletproof, then why are you still hiding? You're not running from your trauma. You're running from your power. You're not afraid of being damaged. You're afraid of being bulletproof. Because bulletproof people don't have excuses. They don't get to hide. They have to step into their full capacity. And that's the most terrifying thing of all. So you keep searching for more healing. You keep finding new wounds to work on. Because searching means you're not there yet. But the moment you stop searching and start being, that's when you face that you're already whole, that you're already bulletproof, and that you've been running from your own power this entire time. Jung was right. We don't avoid our power because we're damaged. We pretend to be damaged because we're afraid of our power. We call our sovereignty loneliness. We call our awareness anxiety. We call our independence trauma. We minimize our strength. We pathologize our perception. We apologize for our boundaries. And we hide behind endless healing. All to avoid the most terrifying truth. You're not broken. You never were. You're bulletproof. And you've been running from that reality because bulletproof people have to be powerful. They have to be responsible. They have to stop hiding and start living at their full capacity. But here's what happens when you stop running. When you stop calling your power damage. When you stop pretending you're still healing from what already made you whole. You become dangerous in the best possible way. You become someone who can't be controlled, can't be manipulated, can't be broken. And the world needs bulletproof people. Not because they're invulnerable, but because they're integrated. Not because they never hurt, but because they've learned to transform hurt into power. So stop running. Stop calling your power damage. Stop hiding behind your healing journey. You're not broken. You're bulletproof. You always have been. The question is, are you finally ready to stop running and start being what you've always been afraid to become? Because that bulletproof version of yourself that you've been running from, they're not in your future. They're in your mirror right now. They've been waiting for you to stop pretending to be broken and start owning your power. The only question left is, are you?